Who are the most likely trade partners for the Mariners at this stage of the offseason? We'll answer that and more coming up here on Mailbag Monday. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Monday, December 30th, 2024. This is Ted Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's our last show of 2024, unless, someone wants to make a move. But, probably not. So we're wrapping things up by opening the mailbag like we do here every Monday. No title sponsor today, but hey, if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. All you have to do to check that out is click the link in the description of this episode. So kicking us off here on Mailbag Monday is Dave, who wants to know who are the likeliest trading pairs remaining out of the Tampa Bay Rays, Arizona Diamondbacks, and Chicago Cubs, and what could the trade be?
The Rays are always the most likely.
Yeah.
And then I think Arizona's probably a pretty distant third. They just signed Burns, which means, they're probably looking to trade some pitching. But until you trade pitching, if you do, there's really not much of a reason to go and acquire starting pitching right now. They've been shopping Montgomery all winter. So that's not a surprise. I doubt they're going to move Zach Gallen all of a sudden. And why would you try and trade for Merrill Kelly? He's not even in your rotation right now as things stand. So
no,
yeah, I don't.
If you trade Castillo and you don't get a pitcher back, Kelly's an interesting option because he's only making, I think, $7 million this year,
something like that. Montgomery too, depending on how much money you save. But unless that happens, I just don't see it. I don't think that Arizona is going to trade you Ketel Marte. I don't think that Arizona is going to trade you Jake McCarthy. I like, but not a great fit on this roster. They don't really have a first baseman to give you. So, yeah, I just don't see much of a fit with Arizona. So I think the Cubs, as unlikely as it is, I think the possibility of acquiring Nico Horner is still out there. There was a report today from Mark Feinsand that said that they are very interested in Josh Rojas. Now that could just be as, Matt Shaw insurance at third base, but Rojas does have a lot of time at second base as well. We know he's a good defender there, blah, blah, blah. So maybe that's a sign that hey, the Cubs still want to upgrade their rotation. They just need to find a Horner replacement first. And maybe, just maybe, that's Rojas. But I would say the Rays are far and away number one. Then it's the Cubs, and then pretty big gap between the Cubs and the Diamondbacks on top of that.
Yeah. When in doubt, trade with Tampa. That's kind of the slogan here when it comes to the Mariners, because it seems like those two teams, no matter what, will always find a way to link up on a trade. I mean, they already technically have this offseason, the Austin Shenton deal. So,
right.
I mean, if I had to guess who it would be from Tampa, Brandon Lau. And that's probably only if the Mariners lose out on Hai-Sung Kim. Doesn't have to be, but that probably is what it would take.
Right. I mean, we saw the report over the weekend that the Rays have had interest in Harry Ford in the past, and they see him as a catcher, which is, kind of a prerequisite for trading Ford. We know just from what we know that they were very high on Ty Pete on draft day. And so that's another guy the Mariners would conceivably have that the Rays would be very interested in. I don't think it takes either of those guys to get Brandon Lau, who, as far as we can tell, doesn't have much of a market. So I don't think that you'd have to trade either one of those guys straight up to get Lau. So I don't know, maybe it's Lau and Fairbanks. Maybe it's like that. That would cost more than Ford, but you get the point. There are options in Tampa. And again, aside from Horner in Chicago, maybe Seiya Suzuki still is out there, but I kind of doubt it. And then in Arizona, you don't need any of their pitching. They've been shopping Jake McCarthy apparently, and you do have room for another outfielder. But what does that cost? Does that make a lot of sense considering the cost? Probably not.
Tyler wants to know, could the Royals be a team that is going under the radar as a trade partner? Dipoto made the Samad Taylor move last offseason, so he's definitely worked with their front office recently. Yeah, that's someone that we've talked about. I don't know what exactly their plan is. I'm sure they've said by now what their plan is after adding Jonathan India, but I haven't seen that personally. But, from the outside looking in, taking a glance at their roster, you would think that with the addition of India that Michael Massey or Maikel Garcia are available, at least to a certain degree. So it would probably be one of those two guys. I mean, there's always the possibility for a much smaller trade between the Mariners and the Royals, but on more of a, from more of a top end perspective, I would think it would be either Garcia or Massey if something was going to happen between these two teams.
Yeah. The Royals have talked about playing India in left field some too, but I think that's just about kind of, trying to maintain some leverage.
And that outfield?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, probably not. I think Garcia or Massey, my guess is that the Royals would like to move Garcia. We've talked about this in the past. He's interesting, but you'd much prefer him in a utility role. Or more of a second baseman than a third baseman. The bat doesn't profile there at all. He does hit the ball pretty hard. He just hits it on the ground a lot. So that's a problem. Massey doesn't get on base a ton, but he hits for a lot of power. The bats are kind of like inverse. Like Garcia's bat plays well at second. Massey's bat plays better at third, but whatever. So either of those two guys make sense. I'm not sure if the Royals would trade Massey, but maybe. They're kind of tough to it's kind of tough to lock down on like what they would want for these guys. They could probably use some bullpen help, but you're not trading Munoz. Are they moving Massey for anybody but Munoz? Maybe not. I could throw a name at you that I don't think it's been talked about, but
Pasquantino.
I mean, that would be great too. But I think that's probably like a Miller or Wu thing, and no, that's not happening. So maybe MJ Melendez is a guy the Mariners think they can get something out of. Former catcher, he's played a lot of left field, not particularly good out there. And it's kind of one of those things where like there's really not much in the data that tells you like Melendez can get better. But every time I watch him play, which granted is always against the Mariners, he destroys you. And so it's like, like
I wonder if that's actually true or that's just like a Mandela effect type of thing.
Like if Melendez actually destroys the Mariners. Yeah. Tell you what, we'll look it up during the break and we'll let you guys know. But Melendez is a guy that I've always kind of been like, there's more there.
Because I feel like that too, by the way.
Yeah.
But also the only thing that I can really remember is him hitting that one home run in that series at Kauffman this past year.
Yeah. And by the way, my MJ Melendez love has almost nothing to do with the fact that I absolutely rake with him in the show. Melendez is interesting. Do I think the Mariners are all that interested in Melendez? No, not really, but that's just a name from Kansas City who maybe might be available, who he's pretty much a DH only though, and that's kind of the issue. Maybe he could play first base for you.
Yeah, I mean, going back to Garcia, I think there's some upside there, but we have over 1,100 plate appearances of data that suggests he's a well below average hitter. And 1,164 plate appearances, he's slashing 251, 301, 344. It's a 76 WRC plus.
Yeah.
Good defender, good athlete.
Mm-hmm. Good base runner.
Really, really good base runner. But yeah, you have to get on base in order for the base running to matter. And he doesn't really do that. Like he doesn't even really walk.
Mm-hmm. By the way, we were Mandela, whatever you want to call it. Against the Mariners, he hits 220, 258, 373, 19 strikeouts, just 3 walks. Does have
19 strikeouts? He's played that much against the Mariners to strike out 19 times?
19 times and 62 plate appearances.
Wow. He has 62 plate appearances against the Mariners? That's crazy.
He's played 15 games against the Mariners, yeah.
Wow.
Scored 13 runs, but at 3 doubles and 2 homers, 10 RBI. So it seems like maybe like when he does do something against the Mariners, it's impactful. more so than he always does something against the Mariners.
Interesting. Well, there you have it. Yeah, I don't know if there's a great fit here with the Royals. Like, I would be severely underwhelmed if the Mariners go Michael Garcia is our third baseman in 2025.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are going to answer more of your questions here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked on. rocketmoney.com/LOCKEDON. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. It is Mailbag Monday. We're answering your Mariners questions. Got this one from Brandon. If Harry Ford isn't moved, any chance they work him at other spots in the infield? It seems his best chance to make it to the bigs with the M's is if he can play some third. He's going to have to hit for a hell of a lot more power than he has for him to play third base. Well, they've already kind of messed around with the idea of him playing somewhere other than catcher. They had him play out in left field a little bit towards the end of the season. So, yeah, that is something that they are experimenting with. We'll see if they put him elsewhere in the infield, to answer your question specifically. They could. I mean, like back when he was drafted, there was talk about him eventually winding up at third or second base. So it's certainly possible. I mean, he's a great athlete. He could play pretty much anywhere you want him to. And that hasn't really changed over the few years that he's been in the organization. But I think they're going to try and keep him at catcher for as long as possible. But yeah, if he's starting to actually like knock down the door, which he really isn't at the major league level right now, they'll figure that out. They'll figure out a place for him to play.
Yeah, like Harry's progressing normally. He's only 21 years old, and he's probably going to start this year in AAA. I think we heard that from Justin. I believe he already mentioned that Ford was likely, going to Tacoma. So he's progressing at a totally normal rate. It's just that with the way the power has progressed or not progressed, like his value is going to be as an athlete who gets on base a lot. Those guys typically have to play up the middle to be super valuable. And Ford isn't a shortstop. He's a good athlete, but he's not a shortstop. Second base, probably a bit of a stretch as a result. Center field is less open than even catcher for him. So yeah, I think they just roll him at catcher and he basically has to hit his way up. And if he does hit well enough, they'll find a spot for him. He'll play some first, he'll play some left, he'll catch on occasion. Like they'll find a way to get the bat.
And you'll be tipped off to it too, by the way. If they're thinking about him making his major league debut and they want to create a spot for him, you're going to start seeing him playing, at third base or second base or left field or what have you. Yeah. Like down in Tacoma. So
yeah, he has to hit his way to the big leagues. Position is secondary. But I believe he was also working with Perry Hill last spring training as well. He was actually taking reps at like second and third. So the Mariners have already kind of started to think about this, but the bat hasn't really forced their hand where it's like, look, catching is slowing down his development. Let's get him off that position so we can accelerate the bat and get him to the big leagues. The bat hasn't done that yet. It hasn't shown consistently enough that the Mariners should look at this and be like, the bat is more valuable than, his profile as a catcher. So let's move him off there, get him to the big leagues faster. Hasn't happened, not going to happen. And Ford maintaining the ability to catch is not only important for his trade value, but it's also important for the positional flexibility of the Mariners if Ford can't be the everyday guy at third base. Like you want him to be able to play. If he can't play every day somewhere, you want him to be able to play a lot of different places and help that way. And so you should maintain, his natural position, which is catcher.
Jeff wants to know, should the Mariners have countered Boston's offer with them taking Haniger's contract? I'm not saying it was a good or bad trade proposal, but having Haniger's money gone as well would have done wonders. So Jeff is referring to the report that the Mariners apparently had the ability to say yes to a deal that would have sent Luis Castillo to Boston for Tristan Casas and Masataka Yoshida, but the hang up there was taking on Yoshida's contract. Yoshida obviously not a great roster fit for the Mariners and would have essentially been a contract swap for Castillo, which is just a no-go for the Mariners. They want to try and free up as much money as possible by trading Castillo on top of getting something that helps them. To answer your question, I mean, who said they didn't counter with that, right? But that obviously would have defeated the purpose of what Boston was attempting to do there, which is we want you to take on money. Like, we don't want to pay for most of Castillo's contract.
Right. And, Casas is a guy who has his own problems. Yoshida is a DH only who doesn't hit for any power. And so if you're the Mariners, like, are you sacrificing the flexibility that the money provides to basically, would you spend the money on Yoshida if he was a free agent? Is that the guy you'd spend the money on? No, he doesn't fit this club really at all. So I think from that standpoint, it doesn't make any sense. I think if you're the Red Sox, why would we, like, what if we didn't care about money, like, why would we just put Yoshida in this deal at all? We just eat that money. So clearly the Red Sox care about money enough that they were trying to offset some of Castillo's salary. So the Haniger thing would have pushed them further apart. Also, who's to say we didn't try that? And also, Breslow came out today again and said, we're not trading Tristan Casas. We never really got anywhere close to that. Blah, blah, blah. Now, Breslow has incentive to lie, certainly more than all the beat reporters who said the opposite. But whatever. So the simple truth is that we actually really don't know what the discussions between these two teams were, because we keep hearing conflicting reports like every other day. And ultimately, it doesn't matter. They didn't get a deal done. It's not going to happen. Move on. But no, I don't think that countering by saying, okay, well, then you take on Haniger's contract, I don't think that did anything. I don't think that would do anything but push the two sides further away. So no, I don't. I mean, I guess they should have. Like, technically, should they have countered that? Sure, why not? But I don't think it would have helped facilitate a deal at all. So if the goal was for the Mariners if the goal is for you to find a way for the Mariners to take that trade, Haniger isn't the way to make that happen. And the only way to make that happen would probably be the Red Sox adding Cutter Crawford.
Yuri wants to know, outside of 2 to 3 teams in the league, Major League Baseball trade market doesn't appear interested in the Mariners prospects. What other avenues can they take to improve the team and get bats if they have payroll restrictions and don't want to trade arms?
I would say Munoz is a guy you might be able to trade and get better, but maybe not. And obviously that doesn't help you with your payroll issue either. So, it basically, if you can't trade arms or you don't want to trade arms, and in this case, I think we're specifically talking about the starters, because I don't think the Mariners are letting Colin Snyder stand in the way of them acquiring an everyday bat, so, no. So you can't trade your starters or don't want to, and you can't add significant payroll, which they can't. How do you get better? Well, part of it is in-house guys, development guys that you already have to get better. Saw JP back at Driveline. Hopefully that's a good sign. Maybe it means nothing. I don't know. But, Julio has to be more consistent. And, some of these young guys need to take a step, and that's all something you can do. You could also swap like prospect for prospect, where you give up a better prospect for a guy who's like close to the big leagues or is big league ready, and you kind of do that, kind of go down that avenue. You can try and identify, undervalued players, and it's either now the Mariners have done this like in the bullpen in particular, where it's like, they say they want you to throw your fastball this amount and they want it in this location, but we think it's better if you throw it up in the zone and blah, blah, blah. And they do that. Can the Mariners do that with a bat or two? Because Josh Donaldson was one of those guys. Justin Turner was one of those guys. Max Muncy was one of those guys. Can the Mariners find their version of one of those guys? Maybe. I wouldn't bank on it, but it's possible. That's a possibility. And then, it's pretty much, trading from your bullpen, or it's trading, for example, like just Randy Arozarena for two like pre-arb, not elite guys, but like they can fill a role type. So it's kind of like sacrificing a starter for two role players that you're going to try and use as starters. None of it's very good. I'll tell you that much. They should just spend the money, but I think we're all, wise enough to know that that's not going to happen. So if they can't trade a starter and the market doesn't eventually kind of flip for them where they can trade some of their prospects, then they're in a tight spot. And then it is taking the shot on the Hai-Sung Kims, and you're taking a shot on, the Curtis Mead types or the Austin Shenton types. I guess the only other thing they could do is they could be so ridiculously, stupidly aggressive with their prospects that it literally wouldn't make sense for a team to say no. Right. But that's also not smart, So they're in a tight spot.
You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. It is Mailbag Monday. Matthew wants to know, as unlikely as it seems, over the weekend, saw you guys mention a Blue Jays trade for Luis Castillo. What do you think a package with them would look like? So this is something that I briefly mentioned yesterday on Twitter. Not sure if you've also mentioned it, Colby, but obviously Corbin Burns signed with the Diamondbacks. That was a bit of a surprise. The Blue Jays were reportedly one of the teams aggressively pursuing him, as well as the San Francisco Giants. So you would think if both of those teams were interested in Burns, they would then be interested in Castillo as kind of a fallback, right? Because at this point in the market, you're not going to get a pitcher that's better than Luis Castillo, at least not on the free agent market. So, yeah. Now, I haven't worked on a specific package between these two teams where Castillo winds up in Toronto because, frankly, I think it's a waste of time. No one has been willing to take Toronto's money this offseason, or last offseason for that matter. And, Castillo isn't going to waive his no trade clause to go pitch north of the border, especially when he's going to get taxed more. So I think that's just kind of dead on arrival there. But on the surface level, a deal where Castillo goes to Toronto and Bo Bichette goes to Seattle, that wouldn't be the whole deal, but that does make a bit of sense given what both of those teams' needs are and the fact that both of those players have been floated as being available this offseason, and both of those players are making money. Now, Bichette isn't making as much as Castillo, and he's also a rental. But, that kind of makes some sense, but that wouldn't have to be the whole deal. But again, I think it dies immediately with the Castillo no-trade clause. I don't envision him waiving his no-trade clause to go pitch for the Blue Jays, who, to me, are being incredibly delusional about what their situation is. And they're, to me, definitively the fifth team in the AL East right now. Well, all right. So that's going to bring us to the end of the show. And again, unless the Mariners want to do something, which sure. To be fair, leave it to the Mariners to do something right at the buzzer of the year. But unless the Mariners do something, this is going to be a wrap on 2024 here on Locked On Mariners. Our third full year doing this show, by the way. We've been doing this for about 3.5 years in total now. And it was a season unlike really any other that Colby and I have covered. It was, very disappointing on a lot of different fronts. But there were also some fun moments, like obviously bringing in guys like Luke Raley and Randy Arozarena and Victor Robles and Justin Turner. And obviously the year this pitching staff had and the year that Cal Raleigh had. So there was certainly a lot of bright spots. And obviously getting to interact with you guys more and talk ball with you guys every single day is always a pleasure. And we added even more of you guys to the community over this year. I believe we added about 2,500 new subscribers on the YouTube channel. We don't have a way of tracking new listeners on the audio only side of things. But if you started listening to us on Spotify or Apple or any other podcast platform this year, I want to welcome you and thank you for joining our community here. We eclipsed 1.2 million views for the whole year on YouTube. And look, we switched our platform that we use to distribute the podcasts and track our numbers on just podcast platforms. So that's excluding YouTube. But I believe last time I checked, we were over 800,000 downloads. That happened in April. We don't have access to our data from January to March. So I would say that it's safe to assume that we also eclipsed 1 million downloads on our podcast platforms as well. So that's a little over 2 million combined views on YouTube and downloads/listens on podcast platforms, which is incredible. So thank you so much from both Colby and I for that support, for your support. And we're looking forward to, bigger and better things in 2025. And, hopefully the Mariners can finally give us something to talk about here in the coming weeks. And hopefully they can give us a little bit better of a season to cover in 2025 as well. So looking forward to experiencing whatever the Mariners bring us with you guys in 2025. So thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast, not just today, but over the course of the whole year. For Colby Patnode, I'm Titan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Titan Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. We're also on Blue Sky. You can follow me at TDG, Colby at MLB Colby, and the show at Locked On Mariners. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you on Wednesday in the new year. Peace.